Para terminar esta sequência, então, chamo Stefanie Lenk, candidata de doutoramento do All Saints College da Universidade de Oxford e que se dedica ao estudo especialmente da escultura clássica nos espaços batismais antigos, sobretudo do século V e VII. A sua intervenção vai ser exatamente sobre essa questão e chama-se Late Antique Baptismal Imagery at Milreu and Mértola, Religious Ambivalence as a Strategy.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for the kind introduction and for inviting me. My talk today is about a set of pre-Christian, in parts mythological images that were used for the decoration of 5th or 6th century Lusitanian baptistries. The imagery of the baptistries of Milreu and Mértola has already been discussed at length, and indeed I am following on from the valuable work of Katja Morin, Gilles Lopes and Dennis Graham. All of them have addressed the problematic fact that these images occur in Christian spaces and suggested a range of plausible Christianizing interpretations for them. What I would like to do today is to go one step back. I propose to refrain for a moment from looking for Christian meanings of pre-Christian imagery and instead think about the question why these images were chosen in the first place for the decoration of baptismal spaces. It is doubtlessly so that they had to be integrated in the Christian worldview. But why was there an interest at all in depicting mythological scenery in a Christian context? When the contemporaneous use of Christian and pagan imagery in and after the Theodosian period is discussed, the focus of attention usually lies on domestic, elitist contexts. Scholars tend to explain such imagery by referring to the classical taste of cultural elites in the 4th to 6th centuries. It is further commonly held that in elitist circles, classical taste and a Christian worldview were compatible with each other. As a consequence, when it comes to imagery, it is often argued that subject matters of pagan origin were stripped of their religious significance and therefore not a threat to educated Christians. For classical imagery in ecclesiastical contexts, it is harder to make the same argument. Much larger parts of society came to see these images. Certainly not all of the churchgoers had the sort of education which enabled them to differentiate between the secular and the religious content of myth. Furthermore, there are many attestations of the problematic relationship to late antique Christians which pagan material remains. As a consequence of such accounts, scholarship often differentiates between the elite and the uneducated masses. We find it difficult to imagine that the wider church community could adopt a moderate approach to or positive conception of the classical past. Yet, where such imagery does occur in Christian spaces, we should try to account for the reasons. The reason certainly cannot be found exclusively in the antiquarianism of private elites. Even if these elites were the commissioners of public church decoration, the chosen imagery must more deeply reflect the needs and realities of the public that visited those places. It is the potential public, the users of a space who limit the liberties a commissioner can take, as much as the desired audience the commissioner hopes to address. Hence, Christian spaces that incorporate antique, deliberately non-Christian imagery should be scrutinized for the insights they provide into the religious understandings and practices current at the time of their construction and use. I would like to argue that, in contrast to what one might expect, the inclusion of pre-Christian imagery, the overall intended message, the inclusion of pre-Christian imagery strengthened the overall intended message of Christian supremacy. Christianity was a force powerful and all-compassing enough to allow for the assimilation of antique thought. By incorporating the classical past in the accepted Christian canon of images, Christian communities established an ancestral heritage with antiquity. Doing so, they confirmed Christianity's role as the Roman state religion and allowed the Church to acquire an ostensibly Roman, or at least Roman-inflected appearance. I have chosen to focus on baptistries not because they are the only public Christian spaces to which my assessment would apply, but because the representation of Christian beliefs and values appears to be particularly necessary in these spaces. The baptistry is the space of initiation to Christianity. Here the Christian faith is professed for the first time. The iconography linked to baptism, therefore, we would expect to be carefully chosen and matched with a Christian truth that is revealed and adopted. This is even more the case for the late antique period in a religiously diverse society characterized by heresies and surviving pagan practices. Adult baptism was still customary until the 6th century in Iberia. Unbaptized adults constituted a significant audience for baptismal decoration, and there was a good chance that both long-term catechumens and new converts would have come in contact with pagan practice earlier in their life. In light of this, unambiguous visual messages appear even more necessary. All in all, it seems to be a reasonable premise that baptismal decoration in late antiquity should represent, or at least not interfere with, the core beliefs of the Christian community. I'm focusing today on the particularly interesting case of the baptismal rails of the so-called Temple of Milreu. As you all know, opposite the Villa Rustica, a construction of monumental scale was built at some point in the first half of the 4th century on the other side of the road. The monument, that must have had a luxurious interior, according to the remaining fragments stored here in the museum, is raised on a podium surrounded by columns and could be walked around. A gallery and a walled court surrounded it. The podium supporting the monument is 1.20 meters high and was covered by a 52-meter-long mosaic frieze. Its mosaic decoration shares the maritime motif, featuring all sorts of fish, with the floor mosaics of the bath and peristyle of the villa. Two different functions of the monument have been suggested. Traditionally, it has been regarded as a temple dedicated to a water deity, but more recently, Dennis Grant suggested that it was a mausoleum, initially on the grounds that no devotional objects or inscriptions have been found during the excavations. Grant compares it to the typologically similar buildings at the Villa of Sant Cugat in the Alentejo and at the Villa of Quinta de Marin in the Algarve. The subsequent phase of Christian use of this site is difficult to interpret. A baptismal font that you see, the pile of stones is what you see today of it. The baptismal font is situated in the northwest of the monument, between the platform and the outer wall of the court. Because of its quadrangular shape, with two sets of narrow steps, it can be dated to the second half of the 5th or 6th century. So, I don't have a pointer, but in the image below, where the pile of stones is, this used to be the font. The ground plan from 1880, following the excavation of Estacio da Vega, clearly shows that the baptismal font has been integrated in a special room that was formed out of the wall of the antique podium in the east. So the outer wall that confines the court in the west and two newly built walls in the south and north. So you see the little font in this corner in the below on the right, and in between the outer wall in the podium wall, and in the north and in the south, these walls are new. These are from the Visigothic period. What this tells us is that the Christians who built the baptistry accepted that the mosaic frieze of the podium would be part of the interior decoration of the baptismal chamber. I find this a peculiar choice. That the mosaic frieze showed more than fish alone has already been explored earlier. I give you a little summary of the finds. This photograph, made in the 1890s, shows us the now destroyed fragment of a mosaic of a triton with raised hands holding a shell or bowl in his right, and another fantastic sea creature composed of a torso of a lion and a curled long fish tail, apparently attacking the triton. According to the photograph's caption, the mythological figures were situated on a wall in the west of the monument, the same site as the baptistry's location. Other fragments prove that the mosaic decoration included more elements of a marine theasis and a fishing scene. Still extant are a long curled tail with spikes on the eastern side of the monument, a little human foot on the front side. A fragment of the fore of a fishing boat is stored here in the museum. Another fragment was recorded in situ in 1877 that showed an unspecified animal ridden by a woman, of which only the feet have been preserved at the time. Taking all the evidence together, we come to an iconographic program that reminds, for instance, of the 5th or 6th century floor mosaic in a possibly a domestic context at Enchir El Awara in the region of Speitle in Tunisia. Granted, certainly not all of these scenes were part of the interior wall of the baptistry. Indeed, the location of the baptistry might have been determined by the scenes displayed on the podium at this very place. The baptismal chamber of Milreu was placed near the entrance of the church and not close to the apse, thus counter to the regional trend in Lusitania and Baetica. What we do know for sure is that the pair of sea lion and triton were displayed on the western wall, and that there is a small mosaic fragment of a curled tail in situ in proximity to the font. So besides the sea lion and the triton that are on the same side as the baptistry, there's also this very little fragment that you see in the upper picture. Because of its shape and color scheme, it has been suggested that this fragment is the last remains of the triton on the photograph from 1890. So where the tail of the triton turns from white to black, this little piece is suggested to be the same piece that is on the left in the fragment. The baptismal chamber, However, closer inspection of the shape of the menander below the tail in situ and the mythological scene recorded in the photograph makes it evident that the two fragments cannot be part of the same ornament. The wave pattern is significantly less steep on the photograph, and the color scheme is apparently reduced too. So these can actually not be the same. If we accept that the caption from the 1890s is correct, that the mosaic was displayed on a wall west of the monument, the most likely explanation would be that the mosaic was in fact mounted on another wall west of the monument. And we know that the wave pattern on the entire side of the podium is the same, so it cannot be in another location on that podium. The logical alternative is the outer wall that encircled the court around the monument. Because the photograph shows the brick wall of the monument, the mythological scene must have faced westwards out of the inner precinct of the monument. Our reconstruction of the decorative program of the baptistry of Milreu results in a pair of triton and a sea lion on the outer wall of the complex, behind which the baptistry was located, and one sea creature, the one you see the fragment of, following the scheme of the triton's tail, included completely or partially on the eastern interior wall of the baptistry. There is no way to determine to what extent the mosaic decoration in the interior of the baptistry remained untouched by the Christians. Our reconstruction must provide for the possibility of a mutilation of the scenes. We do know, however, that at least the scene caught in the photograph in the immediate proximity of the baptistry, so the one of Triton sea lion, was preserved to a degree that left its subject matter fully recognizable. So, why did the Christian community of Milreu in the late 5th or 6th century decide for this location of the baptistry? A purely pragmatic motive is hard to defend, because it was surely possible to build an intended baptismal room if the Christian community had felt it necessary. Granted, it is more practical to mount only 2 walls instead of 4. Baptismal rooms within the church or as direct annexes are also customary in Hispania, but we still find a large variety of positions and types of baptismal spaces that include independently functioning annexes, like the one at Torre de Palma, or even freestanding rotundas, as in Algeciras in Murcia. Regional conventions seem to have been in place, but there were no defining rules for the location of baptistries. There was more than enough space on the grounds of the villa, and we may assume, considering the large estate, enough building material to erect the baptistry at a location detached from the monument. When all these details are considered, the choice of location at Milreu can be said to reflect both a sense of pragmatism as well as considerations not governed by convention alone. Although the Christian community benefited from the convenience of 2 ready-made outer walls for the baptismal chamber, it was at the same time quite happy to incorporate its pre-Christian imagery indefinitely. Indeed, the Romanizing baptismal decoration of Milreu is not unique in the Lusitania of the 5th and 6th century. There are at least 2 more cases, both of them built on purpose instead of being reused. Another example, of late 5th or 6th century mythological imagery is possibly a mosaic fragment from a scene of Bellerophon killing the chimera in Mértola at the southeastern corner of the colonnade around the font of Baptistry 1. Since the recent excavation of a second monumental font located in immediate proximity to the first one, there's leeway to suggest another non-baptismal use of font 1, but there definitely is the potential of them being both baptistries, for instance for different congregations. Then there's also the late 6th century fragment of this curious swordfish from the cross-shaped church of the villa of Montinho das Laranjeiras. Estácio da Veiga reported that the font, and the font is in this cross-shaped church at the lower end, the longer end. So that this font in the church was covered with a mosaic floor depicting fish, so very likely this one, also from the museum here. One could argue that there's a significant difference between a mythological scene that is rooted in pagan beliefs and a scene of fish. Mythological scenery appears harder to integrate in a Christian narrative than the ichthus, one of the oldest Christian symbols. Roman imagery that showed only the natural world would, according to this understanding, be totally irrelevant for the question of lacking orthodoxy in late antique baptistries. While it is certainly true that it is required more effort to Christianize pagan myth, it should first be stated that the mythological scenes certainly were interpreted as Christian in some way. The fight of Bellerophon and the Chimera and the fight between Triton and Sea Lion could be understood as attempts to represent the fight of good and evil. The Bellerophon scene is seen to have been a model for the iconography of equestrian saints like St. George and St. Michael, to the effect that the meanings of the mythological and the Christian scenes may have merged. I would argue, though, that it is important to take on the perspective on contemporary late antique viewers in this question. For contemporary viewers, the fish of Milreu and Montinho das Laranjeiras would have looked as Roman as the Triton or the Bellerophon. It is certainly not only subject matter that makes an image look Roman, but also style. The naturalism of the swordfish at Montinho das Laranjeiras seems to be for an image that should have only a symbolical Christian value, actually an unnecessary, if not inhibiting, feature. It shares this naturalism and the love for richness in species with a large amount of earlier Roman marine scenes in the Western Roman Empire, the Lusitanian examples of which are so well known to us thanks to the work of Cartier-Morin. Aquatic imagery was extremely popular throughout antiquity and late antiquity, both in domestic context as well as in public Roman buildings, notably in baths that were so important for civic society, especially in late antiquity, but also in many other public buildings. This sort of imagery had formed for a long time the idea of contemporary viewers of how the Roman world looked like. Baptismal spaces are, as I said before, likely to be carefully designed. I think we need to call this use of pre-Christian imagery and baptistries strategic. It appears to me that the builders of several Lusitanian rural and even urban baptistries wanted to establish a visual connection between Christians and Roman culture. The baptistries of Milreu, Mértola and Montigny de Laranjeiras made Christianized Romans feel that they were part of the Roman world as Christians. The ostensibly Roman, but not necessarily ostensibly pagan imagery, I hold, was intended to make Christianity look attractive to those who identified with Roman heritage and culture. The question why this strategy was so prevalent in the very end of late antiquity in Christian Lusitania remains to be discussed. Thank you.